Happy Monday. Welcome to the briefing room. Coming to you from the Washington Bureau of ABC News, I'm John Santucci in for Devin Dwyer. Great to start this Monday with you, and a busy Monday. We were just watching President Trump over at the White House announcing his executive order regarding health care. You can find more on that developing story right now at abcnews.com. But we are going to start this week where we ended last week with Iran. President Trump making an announcement earlier today. He has announced new sanctions against Iran. Take a listen to what he said in the Oval Office this morning.
And I can only tell you we cannot ever let Iran have a nuclear weapon, and it won't happen. And secondly, and very importantly, we don't want money going out to sponsor terror. I think a lot of restraint has been shown by us, a lot of restraint, and that doesn't mean we're going to show it in the future.
Okay, so what do these new sanctions mean? Let's bring in ABC's Connor Finnegan. He is over at the State Department for us. Connor, you were watching the president with us earlier this morning. Obviously, a very big change from where we ended last week. As we know, the president had a military strike, was ready to go, changed course late into Thursday night, heading into Friday morning, calling off that strike. But now the sanctions. What exactly does this mean for Iran, and how does this exactly affect the relationship that we face with that country?
Well, John, it's difficult to know exactly what these sanctions will do, given how opaque Iran's economy is. But it was big news today when President Trump announced sanctions against Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah, and 8 IRGC commanders. That's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, the sort of elite military part of the country. These sanctions will block all of their assets in the U.S. and bar them from doing any sort of financial transactions with the U.S. financial system. So again, we don't really know how many assets these folks have in the U.S. It's been rumored that the Ayatollah has up to $95 billion worth in a hedge fund, according to Secretary Pompeo, that he uses to really fuel the IRGC.
Yeah, the secretary said last year, again, as you were mentioning, he said the wealth is untaxed, it's got ill-gotten, and is used as slush fund for the IRGC. He went on to say the Ayatollah fills his coffers with devouring whatever he wants. Obviously, if it's that much money, that is going to have a huge impact on him, on his country. Have we heard anything yet from Iran?
Well, just a moment ago at the UN Security Council, Iran's ambassador to the UN spoke, and I should mention there that the U.S. has called for a closed-door briefing where they say they will provide evidence that the U.S. drone that was shot down last Thursday was not in Iran's airspace, but in international airspace. The ambassador there taking a moment to condemn these new sanctions and to say that the U.S. was abusing its power as a member of the UN Security Council to hold this briefing and to exclude Iran from the briefing.
And Connor, I mean, as everyone knows, last week was a lot of whiplash. We were all up late Thursday night trying to figure out what was going on. For everything that felt like Friday was going to be a big day, some more action being taken, we've had a pretty quiet weekend. And now the two folks in the president's administration, Secretary Pompeo and National Security Advisor John Bolton, they're both overseas. What are you hearing over the State Department? Does it feel like any action of the sort is put on ice and the sanctions is where we're going to be for the moment?
Yeah, I think that's right, John. I think, you know, we may have had a quiet weekend on the military front, but a very active weekend on the diplomacy front. As you mentioned, Secretary of State Pompeo was in Saudi Arabia this morning. He's now in United Arab Emirates this afternoon, meeting with the leadership of both of those countries to try to shore up what he's calling a maritime security initiative. Trying to bring more countries on board to increase surveillance in the Persian Gulf of Iranian vessels and Iranian aircraft so that they don't have the plausible deniability that they've had with some of the other incidents earlier this year where they've attacked commercial oil vessels. Right. As you said, John Bolton also in Israel meeting with his Russian counterpart. He'll be holding a trilateral, a three-way meeting with the Russians and the Israelis later this week, part of a long-planned meeting there, but also raising this issue of Iran and trying to isolate Iran and trying to continue to put this intense economic pressure on them to bring them to the negotiating table.
Connor Finnegan over at the State Department watching this one for us. Thank you, Connor. We appreciate it. Switching gears here in the briefing room, the other big story that everyone's looking to see what the Trump administration is going to do something on is immigration. We saw the president in one of his fiery tweets saying that he was going to announce a plan within the next couple of weeks to actually start deporting families of undocumented immigrants, a very rash move for this administration, then dialing it back after apparently a call from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi where she asked the president to take a pause. Take a minute, and now the president's saying that he was going to give Democrats up on Capitol Hill a chance to figure this out. Well, Nancy Pelosi was asked about that today during a town hall in Queens, New York. Here's what she had to say about the president's proposed plan.
When I saw that the president was going to have these raids, I mean, it was so appalling. It's outside the circle of civilized human behavior to just be kicking down doors, splitting up families, and the rest of that, in addition to the injustices that are happening at the border. We have legislation to go forward to address those needs. But in terms of interior enforcement, what is the what's the point? Well, I won't even go into what the motivation might be for that. Children are scared. You're scaring the children of America, not just in those families, but their neighbors and their communities.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi speaking earlier today in Queens, New York. Let's bring in ABC's Lana Zak, who's been reporting on this for the last several days. We're also joined by Clara Long. She's the senior researcher for the Human Rights Watch. Clara, great to have you with us as well. I'm going to start here in the briefing room with Lana, though, because Lana, you and the team have been working on this for the last several days. You actually spoke to a doctor who went into one of these facilities down in Texas. Tell us what she had to tell us.
That's part of, I think, what's so profoundly moving about her story. She is a pediatrician, a local pediatrician in McAllen, Texas, and she said that if she had in her private practice seen children in the condition that the government is holding these migrant children, and she would call Child Protective Services. That she said it was worse than jail. She detailed. She
called them torture facilities. If I'm not mistaken.
She said that it was comparable to torture facilities. Not that CBP officers were torturing children. Just to be super clear about that. But lights left on 24/7, so children aren't able to sleep. In her professional opinion, that has an impact, a lasting impact on the development of these young brains. They're also receiving inadequate nutrition. And as a mother myself, this is one of the things that really got to me, and I think would get to any parent, the idea that that the babies in these facilities, they don't have access to running water. They aren't able to sanitize and clean these bottles. So a baby is drinking from the same bottle day after day after day without them being washed, without them being sanitized. It is against all the recommendations of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and in many of the cases, not having soap, not having these basic hygiene products, not being able to bathe. Some of these children, 3 weeks without being bathed. It is a breeding ground. She called it a petri dish for disease, and it is fundamentally beyond politics and is just about what is right and what is wrong. And in this case, it is wrong.
And and the doctor you spoke to, I think we have a little bit of sound from the interview that you all did. Let's take a listen to what she said to you.
I mean, there are federal guidelines for basic sanitation for everything, for, permitting health department, for daycares, for schools, probably even for juvenile detention centers. This felt worse than jail. It just felt, lawless. I hate to be extreme there, but that's what it felt like. I believe, let me think about that. I believe the conditions at these facilities are placing them at increased risk for infection, disease, and death. I believe the 24-hour lights are causing permanent damage to the development of their young brains.
And Lana, she is not political, but she told you and the team she wanted to go to see this for herself. And
well, she was called in as a doctor to go there. She's not. We've heard from
politicians that have gone in.
We've heard from journalists. We've heard from lawyers and immigration advocates. She's a pediatrician. Yeah. What she cares about is the health and well-being of children. And she initially didn't want to go on the record with us. She wanted us to know what was happening there, but she didn't want to be part of this this debate, this political debate that in many cases is vitriolic. But what she saw was so appalling to her that she needed everyone to know what she witnessed.
Let's turn that right now over to Clara Long, because Clara, I mean, you and the folks over at Human Rights Watch, I know have been dealing with these stories for so long. What do you see right now is the biggest problem? And the story that Lana and the team have been working on, just to hear that doctor and her firsthand impressions is quite striking.
Right. I mean, and that doctor actually visited a facility hundreds of miles down the border from the facility that me and that I visited along with another team. But what we found was very similar. Children who had not had access to showers, who were eating the same bland and insufficient food every day, who had been there for close to a month, with very young children, with no one to care for them, no one who could, change their diaper, help them eat. Except the other, a little bit older children who were detained with them in overcrowded cells. I agree. This is beyond politics. It's a level of a human rights abuse that the U.S. has to respond to.
And Clara, just based on your estimates right now, how many children do you believe are still being put in these conditions? Because the numbers have fluctuated so much depending on what we get from the Department of Homeland Security. But I'm curious, just based on your team and your knowledge, what are you seeing?
Correct. The children who are backed up in border jails are waiting for placement in another system run by the Office of Refugee Resettlement. That system has an unprecedented number of children in it already, and the number of children moving out of ORR and creating ORR being Office of Refugee Resettlement and creating new spaces has slowed dramatically under this administration, as the administration attempts to investigate and potentially arrest and deport people who come forward for children. And so that is actually the driving force here that's keeping so many children in border jails, the idea that the administration wants to go after the sponsors of children who come forward to take care of them. We know in mid-May, or late May, there were about 2,300 children awaiting placement in Border Patrol facilities. Things seem to be shifting rapidly, but it's not clear to me that they are shifting in the direction necessarily of placement in Office of Refugee Resettlement facilities. When we arrived last Monday in Clint, Texas, there were about 350 children there. I understand now the AP has just reported that the Border Patrol is moving them out and around, but not necessarily to shelters or detention centers for kids. Some of them appear to be moving to other Border Patrol stations, including one that I actually visited where conditions were worse than in Clint.
And one of the other things that we heard, Claire, I'd be curious if you also witnessed this, was that there was hand sanitizer in the facility, but it was only for the guards. It wasn't for the children who were there. They were not given access to it. Is that similar to what you found in Clint, Texas?
In Clint, Texas, children said that they could access the hand sanitizer, but that they didn't have access to soap. And they did not have regular access to showers. And I have to tell you, as a member of this team interviewing these kids, I mean, they were visibly dirty, noticeably dirty, and had on the same clothes in many cases that they'd been wearing for weeks.
Clara, one of the things that we were talking about here the other day, just as we were seeing the shift happening with what the president was saying on one day and tweeting the next day, is just the constant fear that goes through for any family, whether it's the family themselves, people that know people that are currently in this situation. I'm curious, just for an organization like yours, what are some of the services that you have offered families thus far, either those that are finding themselves in these situations, that they're in these facilities, or relatives that know they have somebody, maybe don't want to say the name because they're afraid for themselves? What can you and the folks at Human Rights Watch do?
Human Rights Watch is primarily aimed at documenting human rights abuses and exposing them and working together with many partners for change. But I have to tell you, as an attorney and as a mother, in the course of these interviews where we're documenting these conditions, I just decided, and members of the team just decided, that we were going to start trying to make contact with their families. So we just started using our cell phones to call, and in some cases that meant having to do research on Facebook to try to find the family members, because the kids didn't have phone numbers and they were distraught over that. And one little girl I spoke with had a plastic bracelet with the words U.S. parent and phone number written in permanent marker. We called that number, talked to the parent. He had no idea where his child was being held.
Well, but thank God they had someone like you and your team there to actually find that child, call the number, and let them know that they were okay.
But that's part of what's really concerning about this, that by some estimations, that up to 70% of these children actually have a U.S. sponsor, somebody who lives in this country right now that is willing to take them on. What we heard from CBP, they say that they are strapped. They are absolutely taxed to the max because they have limited resources. They cannot care for all of these children, and they're trying to do their best, but they need to be moved out of these facilities, and by law, they're only allowed to be there for 72 hours.
And like I said at the top, you and the team have done such great work on this, Lana. If you want to go out onto our website, you've got to read the story that Lana, Serena, and the rest of our team have done. The headline on it, Doctors Compare Conditions for Unaccompanied Children, Immigrant Holding Centers to Torture Facilities. It is a really, really important read, and Lana, thank you for bringing it to us. Thank you very much, Clara Long with Senior Human Rights Watch. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Clara. We're going to switch gears here in the briefing room. We're moving to 2020. We are getting ready for the debates. You got to imagine immigration is going to be a big topic. The Democrats face off for 2 nights down in Miami, Florida, hosted by our friends at NBC News. But right now, we have a better friend with us. ABC's political director, Rick Klein, is right here. You ready? Going to Miami? Debate number 1. You packed?
I've been waiting for this for a long time.
I can't go to Florida?
You can come.
Okay.
Why not? Why not?
I don't get to do nice things
It's going to be a blast. 2 nights in a row, and all the candidates there in one place. 20 candidates over 2 nights. Never been anything like this.
Yeah, no, it's going to be one heck of a stage. Well, the one candidate that everyone is talking about right now, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. He is certainly having a moment and trying to figure out how it is to be a presidential candidate while also having a day job. Let's bring in ABC's Justin Gomez. He is on the campaign trail for us, I believe, at the airport, getting ready to head down to Miami with the rest of our team. Justin, Mayor Pete had a town hall in Indiana. A little bit of a rough couple days for him.
Yeah, that's putting it a little lightly. It's been a pretty bad week for Mayor Week here at home. It all started last Sunday with the shooting death of Eric Logan. He was a black man. He was killed by a white police officer. The officer claims that Logan had a knife when he was approached, and it really just set off a lot of anger here in the community for the past week. Mayor Pete had to cancel some events early on, about 6 events in California, an event in New York City. Then he pulled out of Representative Clybourne's fish fry on Friday and returned to South Bend to participate in a protest and a march. And then yesterday, it really came to a rise with that town hall, the anger, the frustration. It was so tense in that room. Mayor Pete was really the bullseye in there that the community was going for. He was a target, and so was the police chief. And they just really let out all the anger that they've been holding. That's really gone on more than just Mayor Pete's tenure here in the city.
And Justin, he is still planning to head down to Florida for this first debate, right?
Yeah, his campaign confirms that he is leaving to Florida today. He'll be heading to Miami, and he's supposed to have some grassroots fundraisers in Fort Lauderdale, one grassroots fundraiser in Fort Lauderdale tonight. So he's leaving South Bend despite that tense town hall last night.
And Rick, you know, for any of these candidates right now, obviously it's tough to juggle their day jobs like Mayor Pete. Some are not in office anymore. But how do they break out on a stage of 10 people? That is not easy.
No, and it's interesting. I think about this. You can categorize by all the different tiers. One way to think about it is you've got the candidates who make news by virtue of who they are and just doing things, and the others who need something dramatic. Now, Mayor Pete used to be in the second category. Now he finds himself almost awkwardly in the first category. The challenge for the other folks is to find a moment, because this is the biggest visibility they're going to have. And you have seen the field begin to stratify, where there's only a handful of candidates who by themselves take 60-65% of the vote. So do you do it by attacking? Do you do it with a quip, with a one-liner? It's a high-risk strategy to go out there on national television and hope that that's going to be your moment.
And the stacking of these debates, you know, it's funny because you look at night 2, and it certainly looks like that the front runners are all on the second night. It was a totally fair drawing from everything we understand. It was held over at 30 Rock. But for night 1, Elizabeth Warren, who's been slowly having this petering up and up and up, that could actually be pretty good for her.
If I'm Elizabeth Warren, I like the draw. I like the fact that she's got her night basically to herself with among top-tier candidates. She's the candidate of big ideas, and to be able to talk forthrightly about those, there's some risk that you're overshadowed by the second night. There's also some risk that you're a target, but I think she likes the fact that she has an opportunity to go out there and make her case.
And speaking of the big ideas, we've seen a lot of candidates today roll out various policy proposals, getting ready for that first debate. You sent the political team on a mission to tell us what those policy proposals are from their candidates. Take a listen to our ABC News embeds.
I'm Armando Garcia. I cover Bernie Sanders' campaign for ABC News Live. The senator today released his most sweeping proposal that tackles on student debt to date. He is proposing wiping out the $1.6 trillion of student debt held by nearly 45 million Americans. Now, this proposal is part of a larger package that also covers tuition-free universities. The $2.2 trillion plan would be paid for by installing new taxes on Wall Street, including a 0.5% tax on stock transactions and a 0.1% tax on bonds. The plan would also cover all private and graduate school debt. Now, with Senator Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders neck and neck in some national polls, this proposal may be another way for Sanders to distinguish himself from the rest of the presidential contenders ahead of the debate that comes in just 2 days, even as some of them have laid out their own plans to tackle on student debt and tuition-free college. Senator Warren's plan caps debt relief by household income, while Bernie Sanders' would apply to all Americans, regardless of how much they make. Now, this is hardly the first time he has tackled on this subject. It's been a main component of both of his presidential campaigns, even as it has gathered a lot of criticism from both the left and the right for his ambitious and expensive proposals.
I'm Molly Nagel for ABC News Live, covering Joe Biden's campaign. Now, the former vice president put out his plan for immigration policy reform today in a new op-ed for the Miami Herald. In this op-ed, he lays out the broad strokes of his immigration policy, which would include Congress giving citizenship to dreamers. He would also advocate for strengthening and streamlining our current asylum systems in the U.S., as well as providing new technology at the border to help secure it rather than a border wall. Now, Biden also talks about the need to address the root cause of immigration by increasing security, decreasing inequality, and strengthening economic opportunities within Central America, talking quite a bit about how America's foreign policy as it relates to Latin America is important when it comes to immigration. Now, Biden is sure of one thing in his op-ed. He hits the President Trump and his administration for their immigration policies, as he does many times on the trail. One thing that's not included in Biden's op-ed, a lot of detail about how he would accomplish these broad proposals. I asked the Biden campaign about those details, and they said that more details on his policy will be released soon.
Hi, I'm Sasha Pesnick reporting with the Inslee campaign for ABC News Live. Today, the governor of Washington really taking aim at the fossil fuel industry, rolling out part 4 of an already expansive plan of his to combat climate change. This one, he says, on day 1 of an Inslee White House, he would sign an executive order banning all new fossil fuel leasing on federal lands and offshore waters. He's calling for a climate litmus test as well that would make sure that all new infrastructure projects would meet clean energy goals, as well as calling for eliminating nearly $20 billion in subsidies for coal, oil, and gas. It builds on the past 3 parts of his proposal to make sure that not only are we phasing out coal, we're also taking care of the people and the communities that have relied on it for so long. He rolled it out this morning in Miami in the Everglades, right in the backyard of where the first Democratic primary debate is set to be on Wednesday. It's in an area where actually they've started to explore the idea of drilling, even though millions of people depend on that water for their drinking supply. It also comes after some friction with the DNC Inslee's had after they rejected his push to have a climate-centric debate. So we'll see if any of that plays out on stage on Wednesday.
Sasha, Molly, and Armando, thank you 3 very much. We are all getting ready for the first debate. You can see ABC News Live's coverage beginning Wednesday night at 11 p.m. That is going to be anchored by Devin Dwyer and the team, and they're going to do such a great job on Wednesday. They're going to come back for a second night of coverage Thursday night at 11 p.m. and they're not going to be sleeping, but they're all going to have a lot of fun down in Miami, Florida. Speaking of so much fun, Devin, who usually hosts this show, has a couple side jobs. He covers the Supreme Court for us, and every now and again we let him do some fashion reporting. So we're going to bring him in now for some rulings today from the Supreme Court. I had to tease you a little bit.
Yeah,
you had to see that coming.
I love being on your show, John.
It's your show. I'm just substituting. I didn't break anything, I promise.
A big day at the court.
Really a huge day. So what happened here? Because this was a pretty stunning decision, 6-3, had to do with fashion and a word.
A big word. This is a case out of Los Angeles. It is spelled F-U-C-T. There it is on the screen. We can't say it on the air. It is like the F word.
I'm going to lose a bet. I thought I could get you to say it.
But believe it or not, the Supreme Court justices didn't say the word.
Wow.
In an hour of oral arguments, not a single one said it. They didn't say it in the decision today, but they said it can be trademarked and put on clothing. This is a story to Los Angeles. A clothing designer, Eric Brunetti, wanted to trademark the word. We're seeing some pictures of his clothes. He wanted to put it on a jacket and have the government trademark it.
Right.
Well, he actually sued because his trademark was denied because it was deemed immoral and scandalous. The law says you can't trademark offensive things. And today, Landon Kagan, writing for the majority, as you said, 6-3, said that violates the First Amendment, that you can, in fact, use these words in trademarks. And there are some other words like this that have been trademarked already, like FCUK.
Devin, I'm substituting. Don't do that.
FD. I don't want to offend your sensitive virgin ears, John, but you can buy a T-shirt now.
Wow.
It's been okay.
Should we get matching sizes? Then we'll go from there. But this
we won't weigh them on the air.
But it is interesting because the court has been hearing cases like this before. This is not the first one to come down, but certainly a word that we can both agree is quite colorful.
Exactly, and there is a big debate out there over what limits the government can set on offensive words. And in fact, Chief Justice John Roberts, I think we have his quote. He was in the minority here in the dissent. He wrote that refusing to register obscene, vulgar, or profane words doesn't offend the First Amendment. He said those marks can't, whether or not they can be registered, doesn't affect the extent to which owners can use them in commerce to identify goods. In other words, you can still say the words, use the words, put it on your advertising all you want. He just said the government should not need to register these words, but as we said, the majority cited that they could. This is a big case, interesting case. Has gotten a lot of attention online, but the real big case of this
you had
term,
a couple coming.
The census decision, whether that citizenship question can be put on the census, is as early as Wednesday.
Okay.
No later than the end of the week. So we will find out by the end of this week whether the census will include that citizenship question and whether partisan gerrymandering, the drawing of those political districts that look like all different sorts of shapes, whether that can be unconstitutional.
And only because you're here, and also I have a few seconds to vamp. You know, every time we get to the end of a Supreme Court term, there are the rumors. Is somebody going to maybe retire? You got 45 seconds, better answer quick. Anybody? Maybe
Well, there
Clarence
are
Thomas,
the rumors.
whatever,
There are always the rumors. Justice Clarence Thomas turned 71 years old yesterday.
Wow.
So he's been long rumored as possibly looking for an exit. We don't have any reporting that he is, but all eyes on Thomas. Of course, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her health problems, always one to watch as well, but she's determined to stay there.
Thank you for watching. I can't wait for my T-shirt. Thanks very much, Devin. For Devin Dwyer, I'm John Santucci. Thank you for watching The Briefing Room. Make sure to download the ABC News app for any news anytime. You are watching ABC News.